Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Saturday, it's November 2nd. Today is day 393 since October 7th of last year. I wanted to start by following up on some of the things that have been happening on college campuses in the US. I'd mentioned yesterday or in one of my updates this past week that we haven't heard a lot about that as students have gone back to school. But I have a few critical updates in that regard. This is also a bit of a congressional update as well. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer from New York recently promised Jewish leaders that he would try later this year to pass a bill that's aimed at curbing anti-Semitism on college campuses. This matters because Congress would be, if they pass this bill, it would be the most forceful response to pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses around the country that were so prevalent this spring. We've not seen the same degree of protests this fall. There have been some, but they've not been as prolific. And the legislation would seek to address the harassment of Jewish students. Critics argue the definition of anti-Semitism that's built into that legislation is overly broad. It conflates the criticism of the policies of the State of Israel with criticism of Zionism. Sources familiar with the discussion say that they're skeptical that he would be able to get the bill to pass in the Senate this year, but we're paying close attention to that conversation. All the while, there are other reports coming in that there are limitations to the ability of students' rights to be able to protest on college campuses. PARC, the Palestinian American Research Center, summarized some of the situation that's happening. They said that Cornell University announced it suspended 15 students and banned 5 from campus without investigation due to their participation in events that related to solidarity for Palestine. They, if you're interested, you can go to the PARC, P-A-R-C website, and they have a link to be able to protest that decision where you can email the university administration. Brown University's chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine has been suspended. It's currently under investigation by the administration. The suspension followed SJP's recent protests against the university's investments supporting, this is a quote from PARC, genocidal activities in Palestine. Brown hired an external investigator, which raised concerns about surveillance and the treatment of student activism on campus. College students at Columbia, NYU, Yale, UNC, Washington U, Vanderbilt, Michigan, the New School, MIT, Emerson, Tufts, Humboldt, Berkeley, Smith, Pomona, Minnesota, and Indiana are all facing police violence, arrest, suspensions, and false accusations for non-violently protesting genocide. Again, PARC has a link where you could send a letter to universities' administrations, and they provide a link where you can send one email to support the crackdown against students that are protesting for Palestinian human rights. In other news, the last 24 hours or so, if you have been following my updates, which I've done daily since October 7th, you've heard I've really criticized the Biden administration's absolute ineffectiveness at holding Israel accountable in terms of the minuscule amount of humanitarian aid and assistance being allowed into Gaza. It was reported this week that October 2024 has had the least amount of aid allowed into the Gaza enclave since October of last year. Axios reported that the Biden administration has been ramping up pressure on Israel to address this concern. Secretary of State Blinken convened internal meetings, and I just have to say, they're meeting about it. Oh, great. Don't we have confidence that they will increase their effectiveness? They said that they are monitoring Israel's implementation of U.S. requests. Secretary of State Lloyd Austin raised demands in phone calls. So it's now been more than 3 weeks since the letter was sent from Secretary of State Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to the Israelis, giving them 30 days to increase aid. Since the U.S. demanded increased aid, and in that letter, they said that they would withhold arms from Israel. It's been nearly 3 weeks, and we've seen that humanitarian assistance is at the lowest it's been in the past year. You tell me how effective U.S. policy has been. In response to the idea that economic instability of the West Bank and the Palestinian economy is one of the greatest threats to Israel's security. Secretary Blinken and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on October 31st issued a joint statement urging Israel to extend its waiver of cooperation between Israeli and Palestinian banks. In response to the idea that Iran is planning an attack on Israel in coming days, the State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said that Blinken spoke on Friday with Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer. For the record, he used to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel, and the pair discussed necessary steps for regional de-escalation. My apologies. Ron Dermer was the Israeli ambassador to the United States. Anthony Blinken spoke on Friday with the Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, former ambassador from Israel to the U.S. The pair discussed necessary steps for regional de-escalation. Biden administration negotiators visited the Middle East this week in a last-ditch attempt to restart ceasefire negotiations prior to the presidential elections. There have been protests throughout Israel calling for ceasefire and hostage negotiations. Those are set to take place today, which is Saturday. In the West Bank, Israeli bulldozers late last week damaged the office of the UN aid agency UNRWA in the West Bank refugee camp. According to reports, the Israeli military denied responsibility for the damage. Some updates from Gaza. Overnight, there was a bombardment in Gaza that killed 31 people. There was a bombardment in Gaza on October 31st that killed 47 people, according to reports. Israeli forces also detained a Doctors Without Borders surgeon. He was working at the Kamal Adwan Hospital in North Gaza. During a raid last week. Today, November 2nd, top UN officials are calling the situation in North Gaza apocalyptic, saying that the entire population there is at imminent risk of dying from disease, famine, and violence. Israeli forces are not decreasing the fighting in North Gaza, but instead they're expanding their operations. They've sent an additional brigade combat team, the Kifr Brigade combat team, to join Israeli forces there. This is the third deployment of forces to the north since the start of the war. The IDF today, on Saturday, released the name of 2 Israeli soldiers killed in North Gaza. The number of Israeli soldiers killed in past weeks in Gaza and Lebanon has increased significantly. The death toll in Gaza is now at least 43,314 people. 2 separate Hezbollah rocket attacks killed 7 people in North Israel, including 4 Thai agricultural workers. And the U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein denied a Reuters report that he had requested the Lebanese Prime Minister Makati to declare a unilateral ceasefire with Israel as parts of efforts to advance negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah. Makati denied the report also yesterday. According to reports from Lebanon, the IDF struck Beirut's Dahiyya neighborhood, and the Lebanese Ministry of Health said that 1 person was killed and 15 were wounded. It is being said that Iran is preparing to launch a major retaliatory attack from Iraq in coming days, potentially prior to the U.S. election. Meanwhile, top Iranian officials yesterday told state media that Iran plans to respond to the most recent attacks by Israel on Iran. In a big decision, a French court also reversed a government ban on Israeli firms' participation in an arms show that is set to happen in Paris next week, organizers announced recently. And then I wanted to close just with the Vatican News update. It arrived in my inbox this morning saying that the Pope condemns the massacre of women and children in Gaza. Pope Francis was saying prayers for the world, condemning violent attacks on innocent people in Gaza and other places around the globe where there's tragedy. He said this in his Friday address as faithful gathered in the St. Peter's Square on All Saints' Day. Pope Francis, His Holiness, once again offered and asked that there be prayers for peace in the world. Brothers and sisters, war is always a defeat, always, said the Pope. He described warfare as being ignoble, explaining that it is the triumph of lies and falsehood, seeking maximum gain for oneself, maximum harm for one's adversary, trampling on human lives, the environment, infrastructure, and everything, and it is all masked by lies. Pope Francis added that the warfare of countless innocent lives are lost, and he turned his thoughts to, in particular, to the 153 women and children massacred in recent days in Gaza. I wanted to let you know that CMEP has just announced our year-end Advent campaign called Advent Not Arms. We're partnering with Embrace the Middle East in the UK, hoping that other countries around the world will join us. We'd encourage you to use that hashtag on social media, Advent Not Arms. You can find graphics on our pages. We'll have action alerts, prayer vigils, and many ways to participate. Please encourage others to support these efforts. You can become a volunteer, a monthly donor, pray alongside of us. Many of us are scheduled to leave for the Middle East in just the next couple of days. We have our End Still We Rise gathering in Jericho. So pray for our participation, the safety of all. Pray for the Palestinian leadership team. May God go before us in the name of Christ. Amen.